Equipment list, encumbrance, nothing shocking here. If you've seen it in OD&D, base prices may go up and down based on your negotiations with the merchants. Again, this was stuff from First Fantasy campaign, which I might refer to as FFC. We kept gunpowder in for those of you that want that kind of thing. We've also added a few weapons that were in the Rules to the Game of Dungeon, which was a Twin Cities group that developed their own dungeoneering adventure game, basically. But because they were related to the same crowd of folks that were on the periphery of Arneson's game, it's kind of like they didn't know where to get their hands on D&D, but they heard about the cool stuff, and some of them had played, and maybe they came up with their own rules. So I've injected some of that DNA into this rule set. Again, going back to 1972, there was a lot of innovation going on, and I thought it was too cool to leave out. Okay, moving on. Hired help. You can hire NPCs. You can actually be a vassal for another player inside the campaign. You can hire orcs. You can hire heroes. Treants, which we call Mrinths in this. That's a Welsh word. Look it up if you like. Halflings, Faerings, Superheroes, Rocks. And there's a possibility if you're hiring a hero or superhero, they might try to usurp your kingdom. Mercenaries, of course, are a perfidious lot and don't necessarily do things that they ought to. Experience points. So this took a while to figure out. Arneson's examples in FSC are not great. And finally, I had a brainstorm this week and I figured it out. I grokked it. And we're looking forward to playing this. What this means is that carousing, which is something that you see in Shadowdark, and it's a lot of fun to play, by the way. The DM I have in Shadowdark has innovated some of these carousing rules, but Arneson actually originated this stuff, and it got completely dropped. I can see why, though, because Arneson gives you 3 different options. Actually, he gives you the main rule, which is one EP for 1 GP, and monsters also appear to be giving experience points, as you see on the H.W. Dumbo character sheet that Dave McGarry shared out. So it looks like you got 1 experience point per HTK, hits to kill, or hits points. But then Arneson gave you options for, instead of just getting 1 experience point per GP for wealth, you actually didn't accrue the wealth portion of that. You still got XP for monsters, but you didn't accrue the wealth XP until you expended it on an area of interest. And those were things like, wine, women, and song, and piety, fame, that kind of stuff. And hobbies for the magic users, the ability to research things. And there was a lot. There was so much there once I peeled back the layers. So that's what happened when I was doing Dragons Beyond. I kept seeing all this stuff that I had to leave out because it wasn't really making its way into the game that eventually became OD&D. So I left this on the table, and now I've gone back to revisit it, and oh my, there was quite a lot. Okay, combat. Combat, we have been told by Griff and some of those folks that Arneson's group did not use chainmail. Even though FFC says that he uses chainmail for combat and added some things like hit location, I took Griff and those guys on their word, and so I took Totten, Charles A. Totten, who created Strategos, which is a Kriegspiel variant for the American Civil War. Long story short, Dave Wesley developed games like Valley Forge, which was published by TSR, and Dave Arneson published a Strategos variant rule system for melee resolution in Don't Give Up the Ships, which he co-authored with, I think that might have been both Gygax and Carr for that one. Anyway, so Strategos. I went back to Strategos. It took me a long while to figure out how to potentially put Strategos into the DNA here. I think in playtesting, this is appearing to work out. We might have some refinements, but I think it's going to be good. Where it was silent, we actually got our hands on a copy of Domesday 5, which was the LGTSA rules for, by Perrin and Gygax, which eventually became Chainmail. So having that on hand too, I've tried to roll back the clock. So we looked at, you'll see later, I've got some Featherstone and Bath in here too. But we tried to be true to Totten, and where Totten was silent, we looked at Domesday and Chainmail Second Edition, and where that stuff was completely missing, I went back to Bath and Featherstone, right? Go back to the source. Okay, so indirect fire and melee are both very different, so you're going to have to read through this. We might do some play tests on the screen to show you how to do that. Resolution, another beautiful piece of artwork there by Diego. He has nothing to do with this project. I just bought all of his artwork, and it was just so good. 12-sided dice, so this is a Totten thing. How to resolve odds from 11 to 1 down to 1 to 11 using a 12-sided Tia Totem, which actually, now that we have polyhedral dice, we can just do this with dice instead of a top-like, dreidel-like device. Okay, melee. Tried to simplify this to the minimum number of multipliers necessary. I think I've got the right level of complexity here. Weapons classes still factor in as you... This is kind of a dice pool system. Well, it's not kind of. It is a dice pool system. But you don't roll the entire pool at the same time. You roll one dice at a time, and then you decide when you're going to stand pat. Kind of like blackjack. And then your opponent rolls too. Now, technically, you should be doing those blind, but at the table, we're just doing them. Attacker rolls his rolls, then defender rolls his or her rolls, right? Combat examples, because it is complex. And then Dave's hit locations. This is a very simplified version of what we saw eventually in the Blackmore supplement to OD&D. Extremely simplified. But I give you criticals and I give you catastrophic, and it depends on how much damage you've done to the opponent, whether you're going to impose a critical or catastrophic. Okay, morale checks, they're in there. Berserk, this Berserk rule set, this is kind of borrowed from the DNA of Tunnels and Trolls first edition from 1975. It's interesting. We haven't play tested it yet. It's kind of complex. Helpless Combatant, this is something from Dave McGarry's Dungeon board game, which came out I think that was 75 as well. The rule set that I got my hands on was from 80. But this is what happens if a monster is up against a helpless combatant. I'm pretty much borrowing concepts from that monster table so that we can just resolve it with a dice roll, right? There's no arguing at the table. We're going right to the helpless combatant rule. Although I did make this optional, right? You can still play through all this stuff. All this stuff, these are optional rules. Parrying, multiple attacks, additional damage, thrown objects, that kind of stuff. Monsters, I love this section. I went back to Bullfinch instead of Gygax that relied on Encyclopedia Britannica that he got from his grandmother, and on Lerner's Bestiary, which was written by a husband and wife pair. Lerner's Bestiary, I put some of the imagery from that into Dragons Beyond, but here we're relying more on classical mythology. I did look at Wikipedia articles, and some of these monsters, again, this is DNA I've injected from Tunnels and Trolls and Monsters, but it's because it relates back to the literature. Like there's a Jack of Shadows, which that is, I think, a Roger Zelazny novel. I call it in here the Jacques d'Alembert, right? I took a French spelling to avoid any kind of trademark infringement. Okay, monsters, I'm just going to skip past this. There's plenty of men and monsters here. Robots are in First Fantasy campaign. I like it. You don't see cyborgs and you don't see androids at this point. So 72 seems to be just robots. Yeah, moving forward. Love this artwork. I mean, it's awesome. And then the stats for monsters are armor class, movement, hits to kill, and then division, right? Neutral, chaotic, or lawful. Hits to kill. Sometimes I've got in here minimum or maximum hits to kill for some of these monsters, because there was stuff in FFC that indicated these mins or maxes. So I wanted to capture that and not leave it, I didn't want to leave anything on the cutting room floor that I couldn't figure out how to fit into it. I'm pretty happy with how this is all turned out, actually, and how monsters can leverage the Totten rules. It's not a huge change. As a matter of fact, if you've read Tunnels and Trolls, which is also a dice pool system with their monster rating system, once you grok Totten, you can easily pick up a Tunnels and Trolls game Tunnels and Trolls fairly easy to pick up anyway, but it seems to be the missing glue here, right? Arneson had these ideas for dice pools and monster ratings based on hits to kill instead of strictly hit dice, which is kind of like a monster rating. Anyway, and Arneson also had the ability to bump up and bump down the challenge rating of an encounter, to borrow a later term. So again, just like in Tunnels and Trolls, where you see monster rating as you go deeper in the dungeon, you just multiply the monster rating up, and you can do pretty much anything with it. Same kind of thinking with Arneson. So I think there's a lot more. I don't know if Ken St. Andre talked to him. I don't think so, or talked to somebody on the periphery, or came to it independently. But definitely it was in that zeitgeist in the early 70s. Okay, moving on. Arneson lets you play a monster as a character. He had Fant, one of his players, turned into a vampire, and there were some statistics on that helped me back into this. He told us how to do hit dice and how to do, and with the Fant character, he gave you kind of an idea of how the special abilities might progress. He gives you an idea on how to do experience point progression, and so I just went ahead and put in the vampire example, and levels capped to 7th for monsters, because the monster can't be more than 10 times more powerful. Monster cannot be more than 10 times more powerful than its level 1 equivalent, and level 1 starts you at your normal hit dice for the monster divided in half. So if you look at the way he does 1.5 times the prior level, the math works out such that you never progress beyond 7th if you're a monster character, which is plenty of experience points, because it works out to be 98,000 experience points to get to that level for a vampire. But you're super powerful at that point. You're basically double strength vampire. And vampires here are Slavic vampires that are very powerful. Okay, Booklet 3,